You know, family, there comes a moment in life when the person who has always been soft, always been the peacemaker, always been the one to patch up broken things, finally says no more. And I'm not talking about bitterness, I'm talking about boundaries, because when an empath stops forgiving, not because they ran out of love, but because they finally realized their love was being mishandled, every mask in the room starts slipping. The manipulator's smile can't hold, the pretender's performance can't last. The ones who are only surviving off your compassion suddenly get exposed. And I believe that some of you walked in here today carrying the weight of forgiveness you were never even asked for, carrying guilt for drawing lines you had every right to draw. But let me tell you, when the empath stops forgiving out of exhaustion and starts living out of clarity, that's when. If boundaries are not betrayal, they are protection. For so long many of us have been conditioned to believe that if we set a boundary, we are somehow turning our backs on love, on kindness, on forgiveness, on the very qualities that make us compassionate human beings. We have been trained to believe that our worth is tied to how much of ourselves we can give away without complaint, how long we can endure mistreatment before we speak up, how wide we can stretch our hearts even when the stretching leaves us torn. But the truth is, boundaries are not evidence of a hardened heart. They are not rejection, they are not selfishness, they are not a declaration of war. They are in fact a sacred form of protection, protection of the soul, the mind, the emotional landscape that God entrusted you to steward. Think about the human body for a moment. We were created with skin, the largest organ of our body, and its job is to keep what belongs inside safe while keeping harmful intruders out. If your skin had no barrier, if it let everything in without filter, infection would ravage your system, disease would settle into your bloodstream, you would not survive. In the same way, your life needs skin, your soul needs borders, your spirit needs the ability to say, this belongs to me and this does not. This can come close and this must remain outside. To live boundary less is to live in danger, constantly vulnerable to every toxin, every manipulator, every energy that seeks to exploit what is tender within you. But many empaths confuse boundaries with betrayal, because empathy has a voice that whispers, what if they feel abandoned? What if they think you no longer care? What if your no wounds them deeper than what they did to you? That voice convinces you that loving people well means allowing them unlimited access to your energy, your time, your forgiveness. But unlimited access is not love. It is self-erasure. It is dismantling your own soul in the name of someone else's comfort. And that is not holy. That is not noble. That is not sustainable. Boundaries honor the fact that you are human and not divine. You cannot heal every person. You cannot absorb endless pain. You cannot say yes forever without consequence. Even Jesus himself would often withdraw to lonely places, not because he was abandoning people, but because he understood that pouring without pausing leads to depletion, and depletion breeds resentment, and resentment is far more dangerous than an honest no. Boundaries are not betrayal, they are protection, and protection allows your empathy to flow in purity rather than in exhaustion. Some will accuse you of betrayal when you set them. The ones who benefited from your lack of boundaries will suddenly cry foul when you introduce them. The ones who fed on your silence will feel starved when you finally speak. And they will call your boundaries cruelty because your boundaries expose their dependence on your lack of them, but that is not your burden to carry. Their disappointment does not make your boundary wrong. Their disapproval does not invalidate your discernment. Boundaries are an act of truth. They declare, I love you, but I will not lose myself for you. I care, but I will not carry what is not mine. I forgive you, but forgiveness does not entitle you to unrestricted access. A boundary separate forgiveness from permission. You can release a person from the debt of what they did and still deny them the freedom to repeat it in your life. Forgiveness is about the past. Boundaries are about future. One heals the wound, the other prevents the infection, and for the empath, boundaries feel unnatural at first. They feel heavy on the tongue. Saying no feels like breaking a covenant. Saying enough feels like closing a door that was always supposed to stay open. But over time, you begin to notice the shift. You begin to notice how peace settles in when chaos no longer has a key. You notice how your energy begins to return when leaks are sealed. You notice how clarity comes back to your mind when the fog of manipulation lifts. Boundaries are not betrayal, they are protection, and protection makes room for restoration. You were never meant to be the savior. You were never meant to keep bleeding so others could keep breathing. Your empathy is a gift, but without boundaries it becomes a curse to you and a crutch to others. There are people who will never face their reflection. as long as you continue to absorb their mess. But when the empath sets boundaries, the mirror turns. People are forced to see themselves. The games don't work anymore. The manipulation doesn't land anymore. The guilt trips don't stick anymore. Boundaries are a light switch in the dark. They reveal where the furniture has always been, where the mess has always sat, and they force people to navigate differently. And yes, sometimes the people you love will walk away because of your boundaries. They will call you cold, they will call you distant, they will call you changed, but let them call you what they will, because your soul knows that what they are really saying is, I miss the version of you that let me take without giving, that let me harm without consequence, that let me drain without refilling. And that version of you needed to die for the whole of you to live. Boundaries are not betrayal, they are protection. Protection of your mind from cycles of torment. Protection of your heart from people who cannot handle it with care. Protection of your time from being wasted on things that don't bear fruit. Protection of your calling from being buried under distractions. Protection of your body from being exhausted into sickness. Protection of your joy from being stolen by guilt. Protection of your destiny from being delayed by dysfunction. Even God has boundaries. Heaven has gates. The ark had measurements. The temple had a veil. If the Creator himself uses boundaries as a way of guarding what is holy, then surely his creation has the right to guard what he has placed within us. To betray yourself for the comfort of others is the real betrayal. To deny yourself in the name of distorted loyalty is the real abandonment. To keep letting people cross lines unchecked is the real cruelty, because it sabotages not just you but also the very relationships you're trying to preserve. So when you feel that tug in your heart, that divine whisper telling you to draw a line, to say no, to redefine access, remember this: you are not betraying anyone by protecting yourself. You are not failing love, you are defining it. You are not rejecting people, you are teaching them how to honor you. You are not closing doors out of malice, you are closing them out of wisdom. Because what you protect can survive, and what you guard can grow, and what you cover can flourish, and that is the power of boundaries. Freedom shows up, that's when truth walks in the room. Forgiveness without accountability fuels cycles of harm. So often, we are taught that forgiveness is the ultimate expression of love, the highest moral ground, the evidence that we are good, spiritual, healed, or holy. And while forgiveness is a powerful and necessary act, there is a dangerous distortion that creeps in when forgiveness is offered without accountability. It becomes not an act of liberation but an invitation for harm to repeat itself. When we forgive without requiring change, without demanding honesty, without confronting reality, we create a revolving door of injury. We become participants in our own wounding because we confuse the release of pain with the absence of responsibility. Forgiveness was never meant to be a license for dysfunction. Forgiveness was never meant to excuse broken behavior or to allow cycles of abuse to continue unchallenged. Forgiveness is the clearing of your soul, the refusal to carry bitterness, the decision not to chain yourself to anger. But accountability is the structure that ensures you do not become a target again. Forgiveness cleans the wound, but accountability makes sure the knife does not keep piercing. And when forgiveness happens without accountability, it does not heal, it harms. It does not free, it binds. It does not elevate, it traps. So many empaths fall into this trap because their hearts long for peace. They want reconciliation so badly that they confuse quick forgiveness with real restoration. They rush to forgive because silence feels like war, because confrontation feels like cruelty, because walking away feels like failure. But what happens is they forgive too soon, too easily, too often, and without accountability. The very same harm they forgave last season comes knocking again in the next one. The apology is repeated, the promise is recycled, the tears look convincing, but the behavior remains unchanged. And in this pattern, forgiveness becomes a tool not of healing but of control. The offender learns that they do not need to change, they only need to secure your forgiveness. They are trained by your compassion to repeat their offense because there are no consequences attached. Forgiveness without accountability is like watering a plant but never giving it sunlight. It looks like care, but it never produces growth. Forgiveness is meant to be paired with truth, with boundaries, with standards, with the insistence that what has been destructive cannot continue. But when we forgive in isolation, when we let people bypass accountability, we become complicit in the continuation of harm. Not because we desire to be, but because we are so eager to prove we are kind, to prove we are merciful, to prove we are strong enough to let things go, that we let go of what should have been held up for examination. Accountability is not revenge, it is not cruelty, it is not a refusal to forgive. Accountability is love in its mature form. It says, I believe you are capable of better, so I will not applaud your worst. I believe there is growth inside you, so I will not enable your stagnation. I believe in our connection enough to insist that it not be polluted with deception or dysfunction. Forgiveness releases the past. Accountability protects the future. Forgiveness frees your heart. Accountability secures your environment. Forgiveness says, I will not punish you. But accountability says, I will not empower you to keep hurting me. Together they create healing. Apart they create cycles. Cycles of harm thrive where accountability is absent. Families pass down dysfunction from one generation to the next because everyone is told to forgive, but no one is bold enough to confront. Communities keep repeating the same injustices because apologies are offered, but systems are never corrected. Relationships remain toxic because forgiveness flows endlessly while accountability is silenced in the name of keeping the peace. But peace that comes at the expense of accountability is not peace, it is quiet bondage, it is silence that screams, it is calm that suffocates, it is survival dressed up as harmony. An empath often struggles here because they feel the pain of others so deeply that holding them accountable feels cruel. They think accountability will break the relationship, that accountability will cause rejection, that accountability will ruin everything. But accountability is not the breaking of the relationship. It is the only thing that gives it a chance to thrive. Without accountability, the relationship is already broken. It is already crumbling under the weight of dishonesty, exploitation, or neglect. Accountability does not destroy love, it refines it, it strengthens it, it proves whether it is real. The absence of accountability creates an environment where forgiveness becomes cheap. Words lose meaning. Promises lose credibility, apologies lose power, people begin to recognize that they can do as they please because the empath will forgive without question. Over time, the empath is drained, worn down, and left confused, wondering why their endless forgiveness has not produced healing. It has not produced healing because forgiveness was never designed to stand alone. It requires the partnership of accountability. Without it, forgiveness turns from freedom into fuel for harm. Imagine a world where accountability was embraced as much as forgiveness. Where we not only preached release but also practiced responsibility. Where apologies were not the end but the beginning of real change. Where forgiveness was not demanded while accountability was dismissed. Such a world would look different because harm would not recycle endlessly under the cover of mercy. Instead, forgiveness would heal the soul while accountability healed the pattern. Forgiveness would remove bitterness while accountability removed bondage. Forgiveness without accountability is often presented as holiness, but in reality it can be a form of avoidance. It is easier to forgive quickly than to hold a mirror up to someone's behavior. It is easier to say, I'm over it, than to risk conflict by naming the truth. But truth unspoken is poison kept within. Silence becomes the soil where toxicity grows. Forgiveness offered without accountability can feel noble, but often it is fear disguised as faith. Fear of being alone, fear of being disliked, fear of being seen as difficult. And so harm is permitted to continue while the empath convinces themselves they are being spiritual. True healing requires both. Forgiveness without accountability is incomplete. Accountability without forgiveness is harsh. But together they create balance, they create safety, they create transformation. To forgive without accountability is to leave the door open for harm to come knocking again. To forgive with accountability is to say, I release the pain of yesterday, but I also protect the possibility of tomorrow. It is not enough to forgive what happened. We must also ensure it does not keep happening, and for the empath, this lesson is critical, because empathy without wisdom will always be exploited. Compassion without standards will always be drained. Forgiveness without accountability will always be abused. You can love deeply and still require truth. You can forgive fully and still require change. You can release anger and still demand growth. That is not cruelty, that is clarity. That is not punishment, that is protection. That is not betrayal, that is alignment with what is healthy, with what is whole, with what is just. When empathy is weaponized, clarity becomes the cure. Empathy is one of the most beautiful gifts a human being can carry. It is the ability to feel what others feel, to see the world through their eyes, to sit in their pain as if it were your own. Empathy bridges gaps, it mends wounds, it softens hardened hearts, and it creates connection where division once lived. But the same gift that can heal can also be exploited. The same heart that loves deeply can be manipulated deeply. Empathy, when placed in the wrong hands, becomes a weapon not against the world, but against the very person who holds it. There are people who recognize the strength of your empathy and see it not as a gift but as an opportunity. They learn that all they have to do is tell the right story, shed the right tear, paint themselves as the victim in the right way, and your heart will bend. They realize that your empathy can override your logic, that your compassion can silence your discernment, that your desire to help can erase your ability to say no. And once they learn this, they do not stop. They begin to craft narratives to pull on your empathy like strings on a puppet. Suddenly you are not making choices out of clarity, you are making choices out of guilt. You are not loving from freedom, you are loving from manipulation. Your empathy has been weaponized against you. It shows up subtly at first. A friend who constantly positions themselves as misunderstood, so you keep overextending to defend them. A partner who plays the role of the victim every time they hurt you, so you end up apologizing for your own pain. A family member who uses phrases like, "After all I've done for you," or "You don't care about me," to keep you trapped in cycles of obligation. The weaponization of empathy is rarely loud. It is quiet, calculated, and often cloaked in love. It is the smile with the hidden agenda, the apology with no intention of change, the cry that comes not from remorse but from the fear of losing control. And the empath, because they feel so deeply, begins to doubt themselves. Maybe I am being too harsh, maybe I did overreact, maybe they really can't help it, maybe I owe them another chance. Empathy without clarity becomes confusion. You begin to see their pain more than you see their patterns. You begin to prioritize their emotions more than your own well-being. You begin to accept explanations instead of requiring transformation, and little by little you shrink under the weight of their narrative. This is why clarity is the cure. Clarity cuts through the fog of manipulation. Clarity forces you to ask not only how do they feel, but also what do they consistently do. Clarity allows you to hold both truths at once, that someone may have wounds, but those wounds do not excuse their harm. That someone may have a story, but that story does not entitle them to exploit yours. That someone may have struggles, but their struggles do not require you to sacrifice yourself indefinitely. Clarity is what keeps empathy sacred. Clarity allows you to notice patterns instead of just moments. A moment can be forgiven. A pattern must be addressed. Without clarity, the empath keeps forgiving moments that are actually part of a larger cycle. Without clarity, the empath confuses consistency with coincidence. But clarity says, I can love you and still name this pattern for what it is. Clarity says, I can understand your pain without allowing your pain to become my prison. Clarity says, I can feel with you without losing myself in you. Weaponized empathy thrives in blurred lines. It thrives when the empath believes that saying no means being unkind, that drawing boundaries means being unloving, that stepping back means being selfish. As long as you stay in that fog, the weapon works, but clarity rewrites the rules. Clarity reminds you that kindness without truth is not kindness. Clarity reminds you that love without boundaries is not love. Clarity reminds you that sacrifice that leads to destruction is not noble, it is unhealthy. When you begin to move in clarity, the masks begin to slip, because manipulation only works in the absence of clarity. Once you begin to see, once you begin to ask questions, once you begin to recognize patterns, the performance starts to fall apart. They can cry, but you notice there are no changes afterward. They can apologize, but you notice the words are recycled every time. They can make promises, but you notice there is never fruit. Clarity does not harden your heart, it sharpens your vision. It allows you to love without being blind, to give without being used, to serve without being enslaved. Empathy is a gift from God, but every gift requires stewardship. To steward empathy well, you must pair it with clarity. You must understand that not every story is yours to carry, not every tear is evidence of truth, not every apology deserves your return. Clarity gives you permission to weigh the fruit, not just the words, to observe the actions, not just the emotions, to require alignment, not just sentiment. Empathy draws you close, but clarity tells you how close to stay. The dangerous thing about weaponized empathy is that it slowly convinces you that loving others must always come at the cost of betraying yourself. But clarity reminds you that self-love and love for others are not enemies. They are companions. Loving someone else should not require abandoning yourself. Empathy without clarity convinces you that the only way to be good is to be empty. Clarity reminds you that the healthiest empathy flows from fullness, not depletion. When empathy is weaponized, people will call your clarity cruelty. They will say you've changed. They will accuse you of being selfish, being distant, being ungrateful. But clarity is not cruelty, it is courage. It is the courage to say, I will not let my gift be turned into a tool against me. It is the courage to say, I can love you without letting you harm me. It is the courage to say, I will not confuse your performance for your truth. Clarity is the cure because it dismantles the illusion that empathy must mean endless access. It reminds you that empathy is meant to connect, not control. It is meant to heal, not harm. When you live with empathy guided by clarity, you begin to experience a different kind of freedom. You can still feel deeply without being drowned. You can still care genuinely without being consumed. You can still love fiercely without being fooled. Your heart remains soft, but your vision becomes sharp. And in that space, empathy is restored to its rightful place. Not as a weapon used against you, but as a gift used through you. It becomes a source of connection that uplifts rather than a trap that entangles. And it is clarity that makes that possible. Masks fall when the empath refuses to enable. An empath often becomes the stage on which other people perform. They are the safe space, the one who listens without judgment, the one who forgives without hesitation, the one who sees the good even when the evidence points elsewhere. For those who want to hide their true selves, the empath becomes the perfect cover. They can wear their masks of charm, of victimhood, of righteousness, of need, and the empath will validate them because the empath is always looking for the best in everyone. But when the empath finally refuses to enable, when they stop feeding the illusion, when they start demanding authenticity, those masks begin to slip. The performance no longer works. The act can't hold. And what was hidden beneath begins to surface. Enabling is often mistaken for kindness. It looks like giving another chance, or choosing not to confront, or saying, that's just how they are. It feels like mercy, but in reality it is permission. It is a way of saying, you can keep being who you are without consequence because I would rather protect the illusion than disrupt the peace. And for a long time, the empath plays this role because they are afraid that naming the truth will cost them the connection. They fear that drawing a line will mean losing the person, so they continue to enable, and as long as they enable, the mask remains intact. But masks are heavy. They require constant energy to hold in place. They require constant performance to maintain, and the moment the empath withdraws their enabling, the mask starts to wobble. The manipulator can no longer disguise control as love. The victim can no longer disguise irresponsibility as struggle. The pretender can no longer disguise deceit as misunderstanding. The mask begins to crack because it was never sustained by authenticity. It was sustained by your agreement to look away. When you stop enabling, you withdraw the agreement. You refuse to clap for the performance, you stop providing cover, and suddenly the truth is exposed. The empath often learns this through pain. After years of enabling, after endless cycles of forgiveness without accountability, after carrying weight that was never theirs, they wake up one day depleted. And in that depletion, they realize that love without truth is not love at all. That peace without honesty is not peace, it is denial. That connection without authenticity is not connection, it is control. So they stop enabling, they start naming the truth, they start drawing the line. They start refusing to play along, and that is the moment the masks fall. People wear masks because they are afraid to be seen. They are afraid that if the world knew who they really were, they would not be accepted. They are afraid that accountability would strip them of power. They are afraid that vulnerability would expose weakness. So they hide. But when the empath refuses to enable, they are forced into a choice. Either reveal who they really are or leave. For some, the mask will shatter and the truth will finally come forth. For others, they will run because they cannot survive without the mask. Either way, the empath's refusal to enable becomes the catalyst for revelation. This is why empaths often experience backlash when they first stop enabling. The person behind the mask does not thank them. Instead, they accuse them of being harsh, unloving, distant, disloyal. They lash out because their cover has been removed. They resist because exposure feels like death to them. But the empath must hold firm, because the falling of the mask is not cruelty. It is clarity. It is what allows real relationship to either begin or end honestly. It is what removes the toxins of manipulation. It is what finally separates love from illusion. When the empath refuses to enable, the games lose power. Silence can no longer be mistaken for agreement. Tears can no longer be mistaken for repentance. Promises can no longer be mistaken for transformation. The empath no longer confuses performance for authenticity. And once that distinction is made, the manipulator can no longer hide. The truth is laid bare, and the relationship either transforms or dissolves. The empath often fears that without enabling, they will have no relationships left. But the opposite is true. When you stop enabling, you make room for authentic relationships. You make room for people who want to show up without masks. You make room for connections rooted in truth instead of illusion. You make room for intimacy instead of performance. You make room for love that is honest, accountable, and mutual. Masks may fall, but what remains after the fall is real. Enabling is a form of control disguised as compassion. It says, I will protect your image even if it kills me. It says, I will sacrifice my reality to protect your reputation. It says, I would rather carry the weight of your truth than confront you with it. But that is not compassion. Compassion tells the truth even when it is hard. Compassion refuses to let someone remain in their dysfunction. Compassion risks rejection for the sake of authenticity. Compassion loves enough to refuse to lie. When the empath shifts from enabling to compassion, masks fall. Think of the many stories of people who only changed when someone stopped enabling them. The addict who found recovery not when people kept bailing them out, but when someone finally said, no more. The manipulator who finally faced themselves not when everyone kept forgiving blindly, but when someone finally said, I see you and I will not play along. The abuser who was finally exposed not when silence continued, but when someone spoke the truth. Masks do not fall because people choose to drop them. Masks fall because the environment that allowed them to thrive no longer exists. For the empath, refusing to enable is a reclaiming of power. It is the decision to say, I will not sacrifice my peace to preserve your performance. I will not abandon my truth to protect your mask. I will not shrink myself to keep you comfortable. It is the choice to believe that authenticity is more valuable than illusion, that truth is more important than appearances, that your own well-being matters just as much as the comfort of others. The falling of masks can be painful. You may realize that some relationships were built entirely on illusion. You may discover that the love you thought was mutual was really one-sided. You may see that the loyalty you gave was never reciprocated. But pain with truth is better than comfort with deception, because once the masks fall, you are free to rebuild on something real, and the ones who remain after the masks fall are the ones who are truly for you. Masks fall when the empath refuses to enable, because enabling is the glue that keeps illusions together. When you withdraw the glue, the pieces collapse. When you stop agreeing to lies, the lies lose power. When you stop making excuses, the excuses lose weight. When you stop rescuing, the cycle is interrupted. What remains is either raw truth or empty space, but at least it is real, and real is always better than false. And real is always worth the risk of rejection, and real is always the ground where